All right. I'm going to start easing into our introductions here. Um, Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us this afternoon for our Populations Projections webinar. My name is Monica Cruz, and I serve as the State Data Center Lead for the Texas Demographic Center. Before we begin, I'd like to announce that this webinar is being recorded, so if you prefer not to participate, you may exit the session. And know that this recording will be available this week via our YouTube channel. All right. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, the Texas Demographic Center is the state data center for Texas, and we are a member of the U.S. Census Bureau's State Data Center Network. We function as a focal point for the production, interpretation, and distribution of demographic information for Texas. An important part of our role is to work closely with state and local governmental units, as well as other statewide networks to support their work in the delivery of services in communities throughout Texas. And the foundation of this is the use of good quality demographic data. One of our key products is our population projections, which we produce biannually for the entire state and all 254 counties. I'm pleased to introduce to you my colleague, Dr. Helen You, our populations projections subject matter expert, who serves as Associate Director and Senior Demographer for the Texas Demographic Center. Welcome, everyone, and I'll turn it over to Dr. Helen You.
Thank you very much, Monica, and thanks everybody for joining us today. Let me just start. Let me start by having a general overview of our projections. As Monica mentioned, we produce our population projections every other year. And today I'm going to talk about our newest vintage projection, which is the vintage 2024 projections. We started working on this 2024. Earlier this year, 2025, we released the state projections, and about 3 weeks earlier, we released the county projections. And our projections include total population and population by age, race, ethnicity, and sex for Texas and all its 254 counties. And for age, we do single year of age.
She has to take me home.
We produce projections by single year of age, although we really highly suggest that you do not use single year of age if you don't have to group them, because there are lots of volatility in single year age projections. And in terms of race ethnic groups, currently we're having 5 groups: Hispanic, non-Hispanic white, non-Hispanic Black, non-Hispanic Asian groups. These are single race groups. The 2 or more races and all the rest of the race groups are included in the NH other group. So in terms of projection horizon, we start with 2020. Decennial census project out 40 years to 2060. And in this particular vintage, we provided 3 migration scenarios: low, mid, and high. And we'll talk about it a little bit more later. And mid scenario is the scenario we recommend for general use. Okay, so first and foremost, the most important thing is, how do you access our data? As Monica mentioned, we're supported by the state, so which is really nice, because now we can provide the projections free of charge on our website. So you can download everything from our website. So go to our website, click on projections, and over the years we have added more and more features to help users digest and utilize our projections. For example, the first one here is showing you that we put on a state population projections by different migration scenarios. What's really cool about it is it's interactive. You can hover over the lines and you will find out the exact numbers of the years you're looking at. And so 3 weeks ago, when we released our county projections, we added another feature. Now you can find a table, a simple table on our projection web page that include all the counties. You can search the counties or county you're interested in. And of course, if you want to delve in deeper into the data, we also have this customized population projection download tool where you can select the migration scenario, the years, the age, sex, race, ethnicity, and of course the regions, areas you're interested in. You can take a quick look or download the CSV or Excel file. So with that, it should hopefully satisfy all your needs for the data. And in a couple of weeks, we probably will have all. I think it's already there. And we also have a tutorial recorded in terms of how to use the tool. Okay. Now, in the next few slides, I'm going to highlight some of the findings we have from our projections. First is the state projections. These one shows you the different trajectory Texas can be on in the next 40 years or so. According to our meat migration scenario, which is the orange line, in 2060, the state is projected to have a population of 42.6 million. This is about over 12 million increase from 2020. In 2060, our projected population this time is a little lower than our last vintage, which is shown in the dashed line. The vintage 2022 projection, we had the meat scenario had it a little higher. Something else I wanted to bring your attention to is the first few years of the projection. You can see that in vintage 2022, the first few years were lower actually than what our current vintage is. So this is something new we did in this vintage because of my immigration surge in the last couple of years. The Texas population was estimated to be much higher than we originally projected. To help users align all the projections, make them all the population numbers, this time we adjusted our first 4 years of projection to be aligned with the estimates of the years between 2021 and 2024. However, in the future, you will see that our newest projection will be lower than our previous vintage. Right, and in the next few slides, I actually used, the very nice projection customized tool to extract my data and highlighted some of the changes we're going to see. First one is the projected population by race ethnicity. Immediately from the graph, you can see that all the areas will be expanding except for the blue area, which is the non-Hispanic white. So non-Hispanic white will be the only group that will decrease in size. All the other groups will be growing, with the Hispanics gaining the most population, but the NH Asian, non-Hispanic Asian, having the fastest growth rate, followed by NH other and NH black. And next, we'll look at the projected population by age or age groups. At the bottom, the orange part is our youngest population group, 18 and under. The middle there is the working age group, 18 to 64. The top blue part is senior population, 65 and over. You can see that all groups will be growing, the first thing you see, especially or at least in the next 2 decades. However, you will see the fastest growth in population 65 and over, and the slowest growth among 18 and under. The percentages shown in the graph are the shares. So, and because of the different speed of growing, the senior population will increasingly taking the share of the population from 13% to 22% in 2060. The working age population will, the share of the working age population will stay about the same, which is really actually a very good thing. However, the share of the younger age group will decrease over time, right? And across the state, so far I've been talking about the state. Across the state, this is the county map of population growth or change. This is numeric change from 2020 to 2060. Under this big context of, Texas growth, we all know that many Texas counties have lost population, and in our projections, they will continue to lose population. That's about 139 counties by 2060 will lose population. The growth will, as you can tell from the map, the green parts, the dark green, the light green shades, and so these will be areas that will see the largest growth. And in fact, these areas, if you're familiar with the map, are all mostly metropolitan statistical areas. In fact, these areas will account for about 99% of the state's growth in the next 4 decades. And if you look at the fastest growing areas, which is the Texas Triangle, formed by Dallas-Fort Worth, Austin, San Antonio, and Houston, their share of population will increase from 67% to 74%. So these are the areas where we expect to see growth. All right, and this is a different perspective. This is the percent change of counties over the next 4 decades. This time, I want to bring your attention to the areas surrounding the central counties in the triangle areas. Look at the suburban rings around Dallas, around maybe Austin, San Antonio, Travis, Bexar County, and Harris County. So the surrounding suburban rings are where you see the darkest color of green, which also indicate the fastest growth rate in those areas. These areas will continue to see those fast growth rates. Right. Another interesting thing is to look at how much aging are we experiencing. The World Health Organization used this measure to, this is one of the measures that organization used to measure whether which stage of aging an area or society is in. In 2020 in Texas, we have about 13.5% of people who are 65 and over. So in the categories, this is categorized as aging. So any population that has people population 65 and older greater than 14% is called aging. And if you're between 14 to 21, you're aged. If you're over 21, then it is an ultra-aged society. So Texas was aging in 2020, barely getting to the aged, or almost there. And across the county, about 154 counties were already ultra-aged counties. But we do have, a significant number of counties in the aged category, about 86 of them. However, fast move forward 40 years later, you can see that Texas will fast pace into ultra-aged society with 21.7% of population age 65 and over. And most of the counties, almost all the counties, will be this dark blue and will be ultra-aged. So this is the aging trend is really statewide. And next, so those were the highlights that about our numbers. Next, I'm going to talk a little bit about the methodology. I won't have time to go into the details, but hopefully this overview will help you understand how we project our numbers. So the model we use or methodology we use is called the cohort component model. Basically, it project the components of population change rather than projecting population directly. And the components of change includes birth, deaths, and migration. And another feature of the cohort component is we project each age cohort separately. Each of them will have their own birth, deaths, and migration patterns. And unique to TDC projections, we also model each race ethnic groups separately. They each have their own patterns of change in the future. And so to simplify the process, basically we follow this equation. So future population would equal current population, which is usually the decennial census. And in vintage 2024, we started with 2020 decennial census. And we then add population change, which is composed of projected birth, projected deaths, or minus projected deaths, and plus the net projected migrants. And then we're going to talk about each of the components briefly. So first, projected births. Instead of doing or adding births directly, we actually project rate. We use the female population 15 to 49, and then times the birth rate. And so how do we do that? The first thing we do, of course, is to look back. I was told by somebody, your projection is not looking forward, it's looking backward. I actually don't disagree. Usually we do look back to look at the trend and try to guess the future. And this is actually exactly how we did it. This is the chart about total fertility rate, which can be interpreted as the total number of children being born to a woman during the whole entire childbearing age following the current fertility pattern. So, they range from, a very low one in the world from less than 1 to 7, 8 in some countries. In the US, we've been pretty uh, much blessed by this very nice total fertility rate of around 2.1, which is considered a replacement rate for population. Basically, it's saying if you're at this fertility rate, your population will be replaced every generation without consideration of migration component. However, sometime around 2008, we began to see the decline of total fertility rate in the US and in Texas. In the US, which is the orange line, in 2008, it was already a little or around the replacement rate, 2.08. It has decreased to about 1.64 in 2020. In Texas, we're a little higher, but we have also declined under the replacement rate in 2020, which sat at 1.78. And so if you plot a trajectory, we kind of assume or make the assumption that fertility will continue to be at this lower rate, and although the decrease will slow down. And another factor we look at is, of course, fertility is a very much a age phenomenon, right? So the fertility level of a woman will differ a lot by age. For example, this is the fertility level by age. You can see you start lower and then peak at certain age and then decrease when the woman goes down to the end of the childbearing age, right? So the one I'm showing here happened to be the non-Hispanic white. And so that's the other thing we noticed, that different groups of people have different patterns of fertility. So fertility level, for example, this is the non-Hispanic black. You can see that the peak starts earlier than non-Hispanic white, although the peak is lower. And continue, this is Hispanic, the yellow line. So it has an earlier peak and also higher. And non-Hispanic Asian peak later, but peak a little higher. And so And by the way, the area under each of these curves is the TFR, the total fertility rate I talked about earlier. So TFR can be considered as almost like a summary measure of the age-specific fertility rate, which indicate the level, a general level. And so if and in fact here the Asian, although it has a very high peak, Asian group has the lowest fertility or the smallest area under that curve among all the race ethnic groups. Whereas, and then next is the non-Hispanic white, also has a lower fertility in general. And so that's how we try to look at this. And then we look at this. This here, I'm only showing the most recent period. We also look them over time. And what we have found is that TFR will decrease as shown earlier, but ASFR, age for specific fertility rate, will also move to a later age for all the race ethnic groups. And so because of the trend we have seen, that's how we project the future. We make the assumption that by 2060, all race ethnic groups, except for Asian, will converge to the fertility pattern to as the US non-Hispanic white, which is shown in the orange color. And Asian is a little different, but our NH Asian, they're already having a low fertility and delayed pattern, but the Texas NH Asian group will converge to the US NH Asian in terms of fertility patterns. So that's how we project, in a nutshell, our fertility for each race ethnic groups. Next, we're going to look at the county level. So we want to add variations of varying fertility to counties to account for those variations in different counties. However, in some of the small counties, population size is too small for us to be able to create a reliable fertility or age-specific fertility pattern. And that's when we turn to the rural urban status. We notice here, this is the scatter plots of the county TFR, total fertility rate of each county. So each dot is the TFR of a county. So if you look at the general pattern, and the horizontal line is rurality. The higher the number, the higher or the more rural and county is. You can see, there are outliers there. There are different patterns, but in general, it does seem that the rural area it seems that the TFR is a little higher. And so that's the basis of how we group counties. We look at we group counties by their rural urban status and try to find a good balance where we can reflect the variation, but also have enough population size to create a reliable age-specific fertility rate pattern. Okay. And so this is the county level, and this concludes the fertility projection we have. Next, let's look at our next component, projected deaths. Again, instead of projecting deaths or drawing trends there, we try to project death rates, or the opposite of that is actually the survival rates. So like TFR, the life expectancy at age 0 can be seen as a summary statistics for your fertility or your survival rate level or your mortality level, right? So the longer your lifespan the longer the lifespan of population, the lower the mortality of that area. And so I borrowed this chart from the Census Bureau showing the trends in the last almost century, right? A century of change and how they projected their survival rate or life expectancy. As you can see, The general trend is we have made lots of progress in the U.S. in terms of improving our life expectancy. Although the gap between male and female, so female has always had better life expectancy than the male. The gaps seem to be there. They shrinked a little bit, but they shrank a little bit, but will probably be there for a little bit more. And so the assumption is that life expectancy will continue to improve in the future for the US. And from there, we calculated Texas. So we look at the life expectancy at birth in 2020, compare our Texas life expectancy with the US. You can tell that we are a little lower than the US. And so that's how we began to construct our projections. We assume that this gap will continue. So that's when we take how we take the US projection of life expectancy, add the ratio of Texas to the US ratio of life expectancy, and then create our own state population survival rates or projected survival rates. And we assume that all the counties will assume the same survival rates pattern. And of course, life expectancy is only a summary statistics. We know very well that survival rates vary a lot by age. We start with a very high survival rates. Almost everyone survive, except for age under 1. Almost everyone survive through their young, their childhood and also young adulthood. And we begin to have more deaths starting, around 65, 50, 60, and then it will drastically decline. The survival rates will drastically decline as we get older. And so this is an example to show that pattern. And I use the Hispanic survival rates to demonstrate how we projected the survival rates. So blue is male, solid line is now or was 2020, right? And the dashed lines are future. So you can see that, of course, you see the higher survival rates among females, both in 2020 and 2060. But we also know that by 2060, both male and female Hispanic will see or projected to see an improvement in the survival rates, especially at older ages. And that's also part of the reason why we're seeing the aging patterns that we have seen earlier. Okay. And so next component will be our migration, which is actually the hardest part to project. In this vintage, we use a new projection method for migration. So we take a world wheel, or actually the national view, rather than focusing on Texas. So we start by looking at the US net international migration. And so it equals to the world population, projected world population, times the net immigration rate to the US. So we have the world population projections. We look at, again, in the past data, previous 2 decades or so, see how many people each region of the world have been sending to the US. And by doing that, we were able to calculate the immigration rate. And then we take it down to Texas. And the Texas net international migrants then will be the US net international migrants from the first formula times the share. How many of those international migration will come to Texas, basically, and what rate will it have there? And while the US net international migrants can change, we assume the Texas share will stay the same in the future. And for each of these, the data sources, the US net international migrants, or projected one, comes from the national projections by the Census Bureau. And the second, the share of Texas comes from the American Community Survey 209 to 2019 pumps file. So basically, we're looking at the share in the past 10 years of Texas in terms of how many international migrants we get each year, right? And the next component is the net domestic migration, people moving from other states to Texas. And again, we start with the national level. Here we're saying the Texas net domestic migrants will be the US population times the net migration rate to Texas. Basically, it's saying, so if we have 100 people for example, in the US, 10 of them will come to Texas, right? That's what we observed. And we think that in the future, if US population increased to 1,000, we'll apply the same rate, 10% rate there. And now we'll have 100 people come to Texas. So again, the US population can change, but the net migration to Texas, that rate will not change in the future. And so again, the two data sources for this formula, US population projected ones come from the Census Bureau's US population projection, and the net migration rate to Texas comes from the American Community Survey, same source, 2009 to 2019 POMS file. So this way, now we have figured out how to project the state, international, and domestic migration. And next, we'll further take it down to the county level. So once we have the state migrants, we try to allocate them down to the counties. And the data we use to allocate is the vintage 2020 population estimates, which include the population estimates and the components of change estimates from 2011 to 2020. And we calculate the yearly average of the migration component. We then calculate the county share of each of the domestic and international migrants. And so, and those share will be carrying into the future. All right. And so, and that's in a nutshell, a very simplified way that the methodology we used for population projection. And here is a look at how, at the state level, how we have projected the components of change. Blue is the natural change, which is birth minus death. Orange is net international migration. Gray is net domestic migration. So we project that natural change will slow down, and at some point, maybe around 2050, we actually may see natural decline when we will have more death than birth in Texas. In terms of migration, we'll see slight increase in both the net domestic migration and net international migration. All right. So here are the key takeaways so far to cover what I've said so far. In our new vintage 2024 projections, we project continued growth, although will grow at a slower pace over time. And we also have learned from our calculations and these models that with the decline of births and increase of deaths, migration will be the main source of driving Texas growth. And in terms of demographic shifts, we'll continue to see the decline of the non-Hispanic white population and the increase of the Hispanic population and all the other race ethnic groups. Regionally or across the state, we'll continue to see the growth in the Texas Triangle areas and the metro counties statewide. In terms of age patterns, Texas will continue to age and shift from aging to outer age society. And this kind of change trend or aging trend is widespread or across the state. For almost all the counties, by 2060, will enter into this outer-aged period. All right. So I added this slide. These are some of the questions we got over the years. Let me try to talk about several of this, and of course later on you will add more. You probably want to ask your own questions. So first question: what are migration scenarios? As I mentioned, migration component is probably the hardest one to project in terms of this model. They don't necessarily follow any trend. They can be up and downs, lots of fluctuations. Usually the way demographers do it would be to take a migration scenarios, basically a certain migration patterns, and most of the time from the past, migration patterns in certain period in the past, and project that pattern in the future. To help address the different possibilities, we create different scenarios. It can be, migration patterns from different period in history, or in our particular case here, we have high, medium, and low migration scenarios, where the medium is more similar to the migration patterns in the last 2 decades, but the high is about 50% higher in terms of international migration than the medium, and the low international migration scenario is about 50% lower than the medium. So, and because of that, in general, you will see a higher population projection under a high migration scenario, and a lower population projection under low migration scenario. The second question people sometimes ask is, what are population projections and population estimates, and what's the difference? So estimates are usually about the past, but more importantly, when we do estimates, we usually have already had data about events that have already happened. For example, in estimates, when we also use birth and death, these births and deaths have already happened or been reported. In terms of projection, though, these events have not happened. We try to make assumptions about how fertility, mortality, migration will change. For example, we say fertility will decrease. We project, we think that we'll have these many births. Instead of in estimates, we already know, how many births we have had in 2020, for example. And so oftentimes you will see past years in a projection series. For example, in our projections, you will see our projection series that have included the years in the past. For example, from 2020 to 2014, right? Those are 2015. That are things from the past. For those same period, you probably already had the estimates from different sources. When this happens, we suggest, because the estimates use data that have already exist, they are usually more accurate. So we suggest that you use the estimates in this case. All right, the last question I want to cover is, people often ask us, so you only look at birth, death, and migration. How about economic factors, other factors, climate, all these kind of factors? So the way we view our projections is fertility, mortality, and migration are the three processes that will ultimately affect how many people we're going to have, or what kind of population change we're going to see. These are the results, are the aggregate results of all the factors: economic factors, climate, people's choice. All these kind of factors work together to result in the pattern of fertility, mortality, and migration. And the data about birth, death, and migration are relatively very easy to obtain. And this makes our projection simple and transparent. That's why we really like the method we're using. And in addition to that, to be able to project in the future, right? To, like I was mentioning before, when you're doing estimates, you have data, economic data, or other data already exist. You can incorporate that, and we do incorporate those data in our estimates. However, for the future, if you want to use economic data to project population, you have to have your projected economic data first, right? And usually those data are not available or actually hotter than the population to project. Economic factors actually even hotter than population to project our forecast, right? So that those are the main reasons why we have not done that. Our model is simple, transparent, and relatively doing a not too bad a job. Right? And the best of all, in this model, you will have information about the future in terms of demographic composition, like age, race, and sex compositions. All right. With that, I'm going to move to the future, I guess. So coming up, as I mentioned earlier, we have been adding more and more features to help our users to utilize our projections. Coming up, we are working on a population projection story map, which will blend narratives, interactive maps, and visualizations. They're very interactive. And you will also have some of the reports. Originally we used PDF to create reports. Now we'll be able to incorporate them all in this one big web application. So this will illustrate how Texas population will change over the next 40 years. Once we're done with that, we're going to put it on our website. So stay tuned for that. And another thing we have often done is to create special projections. These projections go beyond basic population numbers and try to explore how demographic changes affect other areas, like labor force, household income, and maybe other. For that, we would like to hear from you. So if you are in need of something, or if you have ideas of how we can expand or make our projections more useful to you, we'd like to hear from you, right? That kind of concludes the main part of my projections. But before I end, I want to put a plug in for our conference that's going to be held, our next annual conference that's going to be held in Austin, Texas. In 2025, we held our annual conference in Dallas. Next year in 2026, we're going to go back to Austin, and it's going to be on May 20 to 21. So save your date. And to learn more about projections and all the other information, visit our website, sign up for our newsletter, and follow us on social media. And in the next few weeks, we're going to post a few visualization on our social media about our projections. All right. With that, I'm going to transfer to Monica, who will help me facilitate the Q&A session.
Thank you, Helen. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. We welcome your questions. We have some time here for questions and answers. I will move over to the chat. You can put your questions and answer questions in the chat, or you're welcome to raise your hand. So we're welcome to, unmute if you'd like to. But what I will do at this moment is go over to a couple of questions that we have in the chat. The first one states, projected population numeric and percent change that we showed, Helen, shows a decrease population for Cameron County, while other neighboring counties in the lower Rio Grande Valley increase. So is there any reason or hypothesis why Cameron County, according to our analysis, is seeing a reduction in population?
That's a very good question. So as I mentioned, we look to the past, right? This is the pattern we have shown in the last decade or so. So these is actually not uncommon in metropolitan areas, right? Where you see central counties or big counties losing domestic migration to surrounding counties. People began to move away from the central counties and relocated in the surrounding counties. And lots of these big counties also get international migration. And depending on how much migration or international migration they get in certain years, you will see, and that will determine whether this will cancel off the out migration from the central counties. So that's kind of the patterns we have seen in the past. So.
And I think it's also important to note, everyone, that we update our population projections every 2 years. So we continue to closely monitor these patterns and update. So it could be that we might see a little bit of a change, I don't know, in some counties in our next release of population projections by county. So just we continue to monitor that um, every 2 years.
Yeah, that's a
So
very good point, Monica. So that's why we, make an effort to try to talk about our methodology, our assumptions, and know what this is based on. And of course, if our assumptions are wrong, if you do see a change in the international migration or domestic migration that's different from the last 2 decades or last decade, then of course the projection will change, and we'll update that once we have the data available.
yes. Another question posted here, Helen, is why do you expect the fertility rate to stabilize and not continue to decline?
That's a million-dollar question, right? So, actually, I don't. I'm not confident in that, but we do, and we have seen a slowdown of the decline. As I've shown you. So when you try to kind of draw the trajectory, it follows a decaying kind of decline pattern rather than a linear, right? Over the years, it will decline slowly. So, but there's no guarantee that it won't decline further. And in fact, after 2020, coming out of the pandemic, we actually saw a little tick up of fertility. I think the next few years or next decade actually will be a very interesting period to monitor fertility to see whether we're going to stay at this low level, increase or decrease. Again, we want to monitor that, but as far as what we have seen lately, and it seems that we are on this, um, declining trajectory, but it seems that the decline has slowed down.
Thank you. The next question we have is just to confirm, these projections do not yet reflect possible changes in international migration since 2025, correct? And will your next vintage adjust migration scenarios to assess these possible changes?
That's a great question. Yes, and the simple answer is yes. Like I said earlier, migration is very hard to predict, right? Just look at the the past several years, including this year. We had a high surge of immigration, but since January, we kind of almost have the complete opposite. So it's almost like a roller coaster in the last 5 years. During COVID, we barely had any international migration, and then we had a surge. And now this year, it seems that we have sharp decline in immigration, and these trends are really hard to capture in a projection series, right? Projection is about predictability. When things change drastically, it's hard. But of course, usually we look at almost like an average pattern when we do projections, right? We look at a longer term. For example, in our projection last time, we kind of think COVID impact is kind of temporary. We adjust our base population, but we don't think the that we're going to have the COVID effect for 20, 30, 40 years, right? We look at years where we didn't have that COVID, um, you know, um, impact, basically. And that's why sometimes there are people who also, or research who also do different scenarios. That's the one I mentioned later or toward the end, where you can have varying scenarios. You can basically have a pandemic scenario projections just to so that you have an idea of the impact of that kind of events. So and again, back to your question, once we have the data on international or the new international migration trend, we'll adjust our population projections accordingly.
Thank you. All right. Another question we have, Helen, is did you use this methodology that you shared to estimate the results of the 2020 census prior to the census? If so, where were areas that the model was less reliable in projecting county population?
That's also a very good question. So we did do our projections. The 2018 vintage 2018 projection was the last one we did before the 2020 census. At the state level, we actually did really well. When the first results came out from the 2020 census, we found that we over projected the Texas population by about 1.8%. But 2 years later, when the Census Bureau released their evaluation about the 2020 census, they said that Texas population might have been undercounted by about 1.9%. So if you account for that possible undercount, our projection was actually right on point in terms of, at the state level. And in terms of sub-state level, we generally see, or we didn't do very well in the fast growing or fast changing areas. Those actually are areas we usually and also did not that well in our 2018 projections. So,
Okay.
so basically areas with fast changes. Yeah.
The next question here is for entities that are using TDC data for years 2016 to 2026. How do you suggest proceeding with the estimates from 2016 to 2023 and projections for 2024 to 2026? Can TDC provide past year estimates not available on the website?
Okay. So that's correct. So the reason why we have taken the previous estimates down is because around the census year, that's where everybody or the Census Bureau would adjust their estimates. Usually, this is when 2020 census came out. This is when we all began to evaluate our estimates, projections, and usually there's a gap, right? In your estimates, you're a little different from, the 2020. And however, in any projection estimates we produce after 2020, we usually start with 2020. So if you continue to use the estimates from the past, you will see this either jump or gap between the old estimates and the new projections and new estimates, right? And so because of that, and to help users to have a more continuous kind of trend line or time series. What Census Bureau usually does is to adjust their previous estimates so that it align at the end point with the 2020 decennial census. And this is called the intercensal estimates. And so the intercensal estimates is now available from 2010 to 2020. So if you want to use any cross-decade time series, the recommendation is to use that intercensal estimates together with the post-2020 estimates or projections so that you can have this very nice continuous time series. I hope that answers your question. And if it doesn't, email me or we can talk.
Yes.
So,
Yes. Reach out to us. We're here to help be a sounding
yeah.
board to your analysis and help you workshop some of your work. Um, so the another question here is that I've documented in the past a seeming systemic bias with Texas with our projections, repeatedly underestimating population growth in major urban counties and overestimating growth in surrounding suburban counties. So uh, maybe my critique is wrong, but I've been surprised to never hear any response from TDC or MPOs on this critique. Has anyone at TDC ever heard this concern or looked into this possible issue?
Um, we heard critiques, a lot of critiques, of course. I sometimes joke, um, that I feel more stressed after the release of the projections than before it's released, because I will usually hear people disagree. So I'm assuming, but now I kind of have get that compromise, or with myself, or get to that state where I think, well, if you don't complain, that means you probably agree, So we hear or criticisms a lot. I actually have not heard about that systematic bias. So if you want to talk to me individually, I would really love to hear that. But I do want to recognize the limitations of our projections. Again, the reason I want to say that again, the reason why we put the methodology on top of everything is you when you use the projections, you really need to have some basic understanding of the assumptions. If the assumptions are not true anymore, are not what's happening now, our projections are not as accurate. So really need to have to understand the assumptions. And when you're using our projections, our recommendation is to really look at this. So is our county changing the way it has changed in the last decade? Has there been new trends? If the new trends are very significant, then the projections, you may need to adjust our projections, right? To be more consistent with the current trends. And again, we also will do that too. When we see new trends, we'll update our projections. But if you have more analysis, can show me and help me understand your concerns, please reach out to us. I would be happy to talk to you.
Yeah. And I'll ask one of my colleagues to put in our email address in the chat. So we are here, and we sincerely mean that. We appreciate feedback, critiques, support, whatever, because we strive to really do a better every year with our analysis and our methodologies. And so it's really important that we hear from you and have a conversation with you, dialogue to kind of like workshop some of these concerns. So welcome
Good.
for you to do that.
Yeah, and that's a great point, Monica. The improvements we believe are improvements that we have made over the years are based on your feedback. For example, the county table we have put on our website is based on your feedback. People told us they only want just to take a quick look at the county totals, instead of having to get into the tool, download the data. They just want to take a quick look at their counties. And so that's what, and we heard that, and that's what we did to put a table there. You don't have to click in anything, download anything. You can quickly see your county.
Perfect. Well, this pretty much we're up to the hour. We really appreciate y'all taking the time to join us this afternoon. And I also just want to commend the work of our population projections team. All of us collectively have, been working. Certainly, Helen and her immediate team have been like really doing a lot of work, and some of us help with the review, but there's been a lot of time and effort into this. So thank you very much. So we're going to go ahead and log off here. So this concludes our webinar. Thank you for joining us. Don't hesitate to reach out to us with any of your data needs. We welcome your feedback. And as we said, we'll be sending out these slides, posting them on our website, and this recording will be on our TDC YouTube channel.